So you will recall that the story is that Rabbi Grona and Rabbi Yoel, this is the story of the first Hanocha, the very first time that they submitted to the Rebbe a write-up of the Farbrengen. And this was the Farbrengen of Beizir, Now they also included in that Farbrengen the following. The Rebbe said, if he would do away with, and I'll give you some detail which I didn't know yesterday. We did a fair amount of research, thanks to Levi, we found it. Levi found it, I should say. He would do away with a nusach that Chassidim for generations say, right in their pan. So he said, so what? And here's the detail I didn't tell you yesterday. So he said that he wants to do away with, they would write like this. I want to pidyon nefesh and talk. I want to arouse, please. Anna. Not I, Anna's please. Please arouse the divine mercies from the chassadim, from the source of rachmim and chassadim. And then it would add al derech machnisi rachmim, similar to our request of the angels. We asked them to enter, to bring our case for compassion. And we say this lashon in slichas k'mavur b'tshuvas ma'ariv. So the ma'ariv, what does he say over there? So this is actually the lashon that he says there. It's an interesting thing. So we're justifying why we're going to a Rebbe, similar to why we address the malachim in slichas, because the problem is this is an intermediary. Let me get Levi's thing up here, the WhatsApp, and the Tshuvas Ma'ariv reads like this. That which we say this is at Ne'ilah, no midah nechayna, we are pleased it should be the appropriate midah, and then we say midah sarachamim. We're talking to the midah, the attribute of rachmim, not almost. It's in the translation it's how it appears. Umachnisei rachmim, umachnisim rachmim, and we address the angels there. So he says that's only meant in a way, these are his words, of shiflus and avdus. It's expression of our humility and certitude that he speaks to the king's advisors to speak to the king, because here's the key nakuda, he's embarrassed to speak to the king. So this is not emtsai at all. We're not asking the angels. So did he have a shliach? But the point is that we're embarrassed. Because we're embarrassed to speak to the king directly, we don't have the temerity, so we talk to the malachim. This is his answer. And the Mariv, by the way, is his full name. His name is Abisal Bruna, and one of the great poskim in halacha in Germany in the 1500s. So that's what they would write. And this is justifying going to the Rebbe. So the Rebbe says, two things no good about this he doesn't like. Just to repeat it, number one, it's just completely inappropriate. You're asking for rachamim, and in you're asking for rachamim, you justify it by saying because it is as explained there by the Tshuvas Ma'ariv. That's not the place for it. If it's justified, it's justified. Now you're coming with a request for compassion, and it's just so inappropriate to give a little caveat and I can do this because there's a halachic justification as articulated in this tshuva. It's just so inappropriate. And secondly, the Rebbe says that he wants to do away with. Then he wants to do away with mimakir harachamim. We're telling the Rebbe that he should elicit Hashem's mercy from the source of rachmim chassadim. He says you don't have to give the Rebbe addresses. He knows where to get the rachamim from. And maybe he wants to get it from a higher place, then Makar HaRachamim. And the Rebbe said, so the story was that they told, that they submitted the write-up of the Farbrengen, and they submitted this as well. The Rebbe said, you put this in also, they'll drive me out of New York, I heard, out of Brooklyn. Want to change something that's done for generations? And then he smiled and said, no, mach nicht, it's okay, you can leave it in. And also, as I mentioned to you, he asked, did you write up the previous ones? Although I should add that they wanted the Rebbe to be Magia, my modem, and he didn't. He just did not have, he'd like to, he said he didn't have the time. He didn't have the time. But he did in the end, what they got him to Magia, the Sichos, the whole Likutei Sichos was born, because Rebbe resisted. Even in this story here, he did, but after the Nesius, this was before the Nesius. After the Nesius, he resisted editing. The whole story in the end was that they said, we need it, you're telling us to Chazah Chassidus in the shuls, and they want to Chazah what the Rebbe said by the Fabrengen, which is what he wanted. So it's got to be edited, that we're doing it to be done properly. So the Rebbe agreed. So the first sichos were edited for the purpose of the people learning it and chazing it in the shul. I have at home, I'm at some of my father's house, from 1954, 53, a photostat, a green covered paper, stapled, and it's called Teuchen Sichos, to be conveyed, to be chazed in the shuls. And from that was born the Likutei Sichos. The whole story, I think the whole history to it, written up in detail in one of the Harrison a few years ago. Anyway, the Rebbe continued like this. About the Nusach, he said, the Rebbe used to write like that, but he wrote that's not our business. We don't understand. He says in Rebbe's Gezachen. So that's no proof that we should write this way. And the Rebbe says, a few days ago, a young man came into me and said he was very excited that once the Fidig Rebbe said to him, if you be Mekusha to me, you'll be Mekusha to that which I'm Mekusha. That's what the Fidig Rebbe said. You're connected to me, you're connected to that which I'm connected with. So this Rebbe is saying, this young man is telling this to me with great excitement. So the Rebbe says he was excited, so I didn't want to cool him, to cool his ardor, to cool his... But the truth is, this is not important for us, to who the Rebbe is connected. We are connected to him. And for us, in Yiddish, Hecha von dem is for uns nicht da. Higher than that for us, there isn't. And he says, an example to illustrate the point is a limb of the body. So you can say that a limb, I'm using this translating here, that a limb gets its life force from the liver, from the heart, and even from the brain. So there's different levels within the body that provide the nutrients and life force for the limbs of the body. But you're going to say that a limb gets life from another head, another brain, another heart? So if the limb wants to be alive, it has to be connected to its brain, not another brain. It doesn't help. And likewise, the Rebbe is the head of the generation, of our generation. So that's all that's negaya for our life. Okay. Now, I wanted to tell you that in this whole inyan, I mentioned this yesterday, that the CHASSIDIC actually says in Derech Mitzvisacha, but then later in Torah he does allow it, and it then brings all of this in a great elaborate ha'ara on slichus. The Rebbe has on the slichus copious notes, sources of everything, etc. And he addresses the question at the end of slichus that we say, and it's a mitzvah of talking to the angels. And Yom Kippur, likewise, bring out tears before Hashem and so on. So he brings the Tzemach Tzedek who says in Derech Mitzvisacha that he wouldn't say it. He says he agrees with the Korban Nisanel that it shouldn't be said. But later Tzemach Tzedek himself writes in Torah, which he wrote after Derech Mitzvisacha, which he wrote when he was 12 years old. Derech Mitzvisacha when he was 12. Whole story there. And Torah he wrote much later. There he says to say it, and the idea there is that they are just shluchim, kelim, to which our prayers ascend and which the Amshacha descends. but it's a direct connection to the Eibishter, not that we're addressing the angels per se in any sense of their role other than a channel. So we do say it. In Tafshin Yud, related to this subject, I'm going to read this to you. This was Simchas Beis She'eva, Tafshin Yud. So this would be, I put it back. I'm so sorry. Okay, we're going to have to continue because it's already, I'm sorry, 7:35. All right, so Beis Hashem will continue on Monday. A fundamental Sikha with Rebbe addresses what is a Rebbe, and head on the question, a Rebbe versus an intermediary. And a famous Chassam Sofer, that someone asked him this question, or a related question, and the Chassam Sofer talks there about a union of a Rebbe, without saying the word Rebbe. It's quite fascinating, and I'll read it to you. And it's a big yesod, we need to understand, for everybody to understand, what this is all about. Okay.